We said soil in the 五行 is the middle, isn't it? Everything got to go through the soil. So if the soil congested, anybody have a problem, every part have a problem, also can affect the soil. So the yin of the soil is stickiness, and the yang of the soil is looseness.
I'm Michael Max, and this is Geological. I have enough books. I do, really. If I did not buy another book, if I studied with a sense of active engagement, I'd have enough books to last for more than the rest of my life. But it doesn't stop me from buying books. But it might be stopping me from engaging more deeply with what I already have. This is a kind of malaise of our modern times, that we don't feel like we have enough. Get a new book, a new class, a certificate, credential, additional set of initials after our name. But what about taking what we already have and putting it into a practice that cultivates a deeper understanding? Our understanding, our own particular view that comes from how experience and study intermingle and create some kind of new knowledge. This kind of knowing is personal. It doesn't come with the stamp of approval from some authority, but rather it's distilled through our own authentic experience. I remember getting gold stars in the first grade. I liked the blue ones better, but the gold ones meant that you were better than a bunch of other people. And I can remember trophies from sporting events, having a GPA that made my parents feel okay, and the first time I could put a couple of initials after my name. From our earliest days, we are invited to join in the endless parade of signs, signals, and sign credentials, the zheng, the evidence that gives proof that we have value and knowledge. And it's not that these things don't have value, they do. But is the value in the certificate, or that you can throw away the class notes because the material of the class has become alive in you? I don't know about you. I find it too easy to recognize what I'm missing. And knowing our deficiencies is essential in growing into a more skilled practitioner. At the same time, recognizing what we have and perhaps digging that well a little deeper might not be a bad idea. It doesn't hurt to revisit the basics and see if they might tell us a different story or open a new perspective. It's one thing to learn the basics at the beginning of our education, but sitting down with them again with some experience under our belt, it can be tremendously clarifying. Okay, let's get into today's conversation with Rhonda Chang on the subject of E. E basically translates as medicine, and she has some perspectives from her study and practice that let us take a look at the difference between what we studied as Chinese medicine and something of the old school medicine. I think you're going to enjoy this conversation. Here we go. These conversations come to you through the generous support of our sponsors and members. Blue Poppy, your new one-stop shop, has speedy shipping options on everything that you need for your clinic. It's Women's Health Month at Mayway Herbs. Check out the new website for learning resources on helping women with herbal medicine. Are you a creature of habit? How about making a change that helps your patients and the planet with AccuFast needles? And later in the show, raising your fees doesn't have to be a difficult process. Jane has helpful suggestions on making it easy and effective. And finally, have you considered that having a thriving, profitable practice is one of the most healing things that you can do? Julie Bear Don't Walk has, and she can help you do something about it too. Do be sure to visit the sponsors page on the Geological website to take advantage of all the special offers our terrific sponsors have for listeners of the podcast. Picture this. Your clinic is buzzing with patients, and then you realize that you're down to your last box of needles. No need for panic, because Blue Poppy, your one-stop shop for all your acupuncture needs, they ship orders received before 3 p.m. on the same day. With a quick visit to Blue Poppy's website, you can order premium needles, herbal formulas, and that special Dr. Bob's oil that your patients love. Blue Poppy understands practitioners can't keep patients waiting. That's why they strive to get you what you need when you need it. From high-quality Chinese herbs and formulations to acupuncture supplies and clinical essentials, Blue Poppy has served practitioners for nearly 40 years with products that meet the highest of standards. Discover everything Blue Poppy has to offer by visiting www.bluepoppy.com. bluepoppy.com, and don't forget to subscribe to their mailing list for exclusive offers and more.
Hi folks, I'm Yvonne Lau, president of Mayway Herbs. May is Women's Health Month, and as a women-owned and women-run business, we especially love how Chinese medicine can support wellness through every stage of a woman's life. So in this month's newsletter and podcast, we're covering topics like PMS, pregnancy, menopause, and osteoporosis. We'll share expert insights and effective treatment strategies you can put to good use in your clinic. Our Plumflower brand line includes herbal tea pills, tablets, extract granules, and organic herbs, all of which you can find on Mayway.com, and where you can also find articles, videos, and other resources to support your practice. Since 1969, Mayway has been a trusted source for high-quality herbal products. In these challenging times, please know that we remain committed to keeping our products accessible and affordable so you can take care of yourself and your patients. As always, thank you for supporting Real Chinese Medicine.
Daily habits and routines feel comforting, familiar, easy, automatic. That's the power of repetition. You've worked out the kinks and can do it with your eyes closed. But what if you shook things up? What if you ditched the old routine and tried something new? Hi, I'm John Sten. I've practiced acupuncture for over 30 years, and together with my wife Kelly, we created the world's first eco-friendly acupuncture needle. The AcuFast earth-friendly needle system cuts your packaging waste by 60 to 90%, depending upon your needle type, speeds up your needling, gives you more control, and best of all, while you're healing patients, we plant a tree for every 2 boxes your clinic uses. Thousands of acupuncturists have already made the switch. In just the last year, they've helped plant over 16,000 trees. Since we started, that number has grown to over 50,000. So break the routine. Be the change. Visit acufastneedles.com. Your patients and the planet will thank you.
Rhonda Chang, welcome to Qiological.
Thank you. Very happy to be here.
I came across your books a little while ago. Very evocative names. I thought, oh boy, I would love to talk to you. So you've got 2 books,阴阳五行, Spirit, Body, and Healing, and Chinese Medicine Masquerading as E. Oh man. I read that title and it was like, all right, what's this woman's email address?
Oh, okay. Thank you.
So you're a Chinese doctor. You practice ostensibly what we call Chinese medicine. We may get a better idea of what that all means here in a minute. I'd like to start first with your medical background. How did you get started with Chinese medicine? I knew that you grew up in China. What were the origins? How did you start studying medicine?
I like literature, in fact, Chinese literature. I want to study Chinese literature, but my father said you have to study something useful, technical, and then to survive. And then I thought about Chinese medicine because I thought that involves learning classic Chinese language. So just to compromise him, and I enrolled. But I kind of really regret during my study because we didn't learn much classics. Just something it can't make a sense from anywhere. Doesn't make sense from Western, scientific kind of ways, and there's no 阴阳五行. I mean, there's a 阴阳五行, but when you're explaining disease or sickness, it doesn't really make sense. So I used to always ask a teacher, I said, why? And then they used to say, that's what old people is. I used to say, old people still have to make sense. They still have to have a reasoning system. And then he just pushed me off. I almost dropped out university because I just can't get through there. But in China those days, if you drop, you can never get back to university again, and then you go to be a farmer.
Right. Well, I think you're lucky that they didn't kick you out by asking questions like that,
Yes, yeah. I mean, they give me very dirty looks, and the whole class of students all turned to me and give me dirty looks as well. It wasn't very pleasant study.
No, it doesn't sound like it. Really, your love is literature. You choose medicine because, well, all right, my dad says I have to do something practical. I have a younger brother who's a musician. My mom said, you should study accounting. And my brother was like, yeah, I'm not doing that. People that love us, they want to see us do well. And if we're doing something that might not be practical, they're concerned. So I can understand your father's point of view. You take this great middle road. I'll learn medicine. Oh, there's wonderful literature in medicine. There's old stuff, but you didn't get it back then.
That's what it is. And he wasn't worried about so much of a living because the communists those days, and the government gave you a job, you're always working. Doesn't matter what area. But he worried about me writing something wrong to the government and I'll be in jail. And he said, I'm not going to visit you in jail. That's what it is.
So your father knew from a young age that you were a little bit of a troublemaker.
Well, I did, actually. I have been very outspoken. Always be a troublemaker. Sure.
I want to jump right into some of this then. Like I said, I read the title of your book, Chinese Medicine Masquerading as E. E meaning medicine, not the E as like insignificance for those people that just look at YE. Very evocative title.
Well, isn't that masquerading? Because everybody think they do learn Chinese medicine, but because you learn this Chinese medicine, not ancient E. So I have to separate these two, and they are masquerading. A lot of people, especially in the West, actually said, we learned a lot of yin and yang and the wuxing, everything. They say the one lady actually told me, that's everywhere in our text. They just don't know what's the difference. You learn the yin and the yang, but you didn't learn the change. The book of change is very important. The yin and the yang is not about cold and hot. It's about the changes. So we don't know the changes, and we don't know that links with the wuxing. You know wuxing, but how the wuxing link with the yin yang, what changes, what makes wuxing from yin yang, what the relationship, we don't know. So we say that when we talk about organs, we talk about liver, kidney, lung. That's like an anatomical kind of a sense, but it doesn't really link with the change. So then when you're in the clinic treatment, you really don't know how to apply for, if somebody got a cough and you use a lot of lung herbs, cleaning, everything, and doesn't work, and you can't really think about how wuxing, the soil actually create the metal. So you got to work on soil, strengthen the soil, and to work on the lung. You wouldn't know. You got to kind of wuxing, wuxing, but you don't know how the relationship to wuxing and the changes. Yeah, and then some people get headache, and then they say, oh, it's a liver headache or cold headache, hot headache, and dry headache and wet headache and all that. But really, headache, you got to look at say, if you understand the headache from, say, you understand the kidney and the liver, the relationship, and you might actually make a link. So then you work on the head. You don't work on the headache. You work on the kidney. And you work on so I write the second book, Yin Yang, the Wuxing Spirit, Body and Healing. You might work on the strength and warming the kidney to calm the liver. So instead of saying, I'm just going to clean the liver, and you do more, you hurt more. So that's where we've gone wrong.
Yeah. Well, I know that a lot of people get out of school and complain about, we've learned all this interesting theory, and the theory is beautiful. The theory is poetic, and there's something about it that describes nature, and I think many people really have a feeling that if they understand nature, then you can use nature, to help people. And yet, when we start to get into practice, it all kind of falls apart. It's like in our heads, it kind of makes a sort of a sense, but bringing into the practicality of clinic is another story. And of course, then we have patients who come in and go, I've got a headache. It's right here on the side of my head. Fix my headache. And
then you'll say, oh, that's liver headache. But what makes liver headache? You got to actually understand from yin yang wuxing point of view. So liver got a, what I call the yin and yang side. And if that headache was from the yin, liver yin problem, and what do you do for liver yin? You make the water rising, isn't it? So when the water is too cold, it's freeze. It doesn't move. That causes your liver kind of dry. So what we do is we warm the kidney, and then you rise the water, and you moist the trees. So you make the flexibility, and you stop that liver kind of headache. isn't it? So instead of saying, oh, this is dry headache, it's cold headache, it's a wet headache, it's just nonsense, pure nonsense. I really hate them. The reason I gave this kind of a title because I really regret what we learned in the university. 5 years you spend and then you learn all nonsense, rubbish. It just get me really angry when I think about this.
I hear the anger in your voice. We're going to have to work a little bit on your wood.
But my book hasn't got to China yet, and they won't accept it. I can't get them published in China. I can't even get through to China yet. So,
well, maybe not right now, but
the
perhaps
message
in the
will
future.
get through one day. Yeah, I know it will be because if get to China, I think that will change the direction. Hopefully, it can be. It will be. And students will ask the teacher, say, "What you teaching?" And it will embarrass them.
Well, I think we probably have that here in the United States as well. Sometimes, let me look at my experience. I can remember being in Chinese medicine school. This was a long time ago. This was 20 plus years ago. And sometimes I'd have a question about something. I didn't really understand it. I'd ask my teacher. I would still not understand it. Sometimes my teacher didn't understand it. My teacher didn't have it to give to me. Now, there were plenty of things my teachers did give to me. I feel very grateful for the education that I've got. But I think this is true not just in medicine, but anywhere. If the teacher doesn't really understand it themselves, it's hard to transmit something deeper to the student. You can only give what you've already gotten yourself.
Yeah, the problem is the reason the teacher doesn't really know enough or they don't teach well is because we don't learn the theory properly. So I'm writing a new book at the moment, and I call them a 八卦, 八卦 or 易经 and medicine.
Not bagua like gossip.
Well, that's what they're making 八卦 as gossips now. But 八卦 is profound, beautiful, theoretical knowledge and foundation to this practice, really. And we got to explain the changes and all the gua. In the gua we learn now is talk about lucky or not lucky. But really, the gua, if you talk about it, you got to say how much yin, how much yang, how they change, where they go. And then if you understand that, so if I say I'm in the deep trouble, like a 困卦, and then you say where the 困卦link to, and then you might actually, next one will be 景卦, isn't it? And the 景卦linked to the other卦. So you know the lines, how they change, the yao, you know the line to change. And if you know the line change, and you actually can apply them. And also I'm trying to get people understand how acupuncture wasn't experiential. It's all to do with the 八卦, because it make your body as a 八卦, meridians. That's why our first meridian says from lung, isn't it? The reason is because, the 乾卦, the first one is 兑. 兑 is the lung, is the metal. So that's where they come from. And then the points, they say 360 points that responding to heaven and earth. So the 360 points, because you got 64 gua, but one is heaven, one is earth, kun and the qian, and then there's the sun and the moon, isn't it? So then you don't have that in your body. So you got 60 gua. And the 60 gua with the 6th line, there's 360 points. So if you know each line, it's yang or it's yin, so then you actually can change the line and then fix the problems. Very
so we're
easy.
really looking at the transformations of yin and yang. And as we began this conversation, you first connected yin yang to the I Ching, to the book changes. You connected it to that.
Yeah. And that's why I argue a lot of people say Chinese medicine has been changed or never had a proper foundations. And that's the foundation, and you can't argue. And every book you're looking at, it's all about the yin yang. It's all about wuxing. It's all about the change, really. So when people get rid of it, like Walker said, very, very good. He writes so many books, but he hardly mentioning about yin yang wuxing. Doesn't even in his vocabulary. So what's that mean? That means you don't know the change. And what kind of medicine are you? So I like to say, he got to be separate from what I promote to the practice. It's got to be change the name So I start with giving it two different names, Yi and the Chinese medicine. Yeah.
So tell us a little more about the difference between Yi and Chinese medicine. You mentioned earlier Yi is more about the ancient medicine. We've talked a little bit about阴陽五行, the changes that you can see, and you can see, I mean, they're detailed beautifully in the zheng. So tell us a little more for our listeners that may not understand this. When you're talking about Yi, and especially in comparison to, air quotes here, Chinese medicine, what are we talking about? Give us kind of the 30,000-foot view here.
Well, the first thing is about the change. In modern Chinese medicine, we also talk about yin and yang, but we don't talk about the change. Yin and yang is about change. Yin eventually changed to yang, yang eventually changed to yin. And during this change, there's 5 important steps that actually transformation in points, which we call the 五行. So you got to understand these two, and you analyze the body as, you don't see the body as 5 organs. You see the body as 5, I call it 五行 organ. That's why when in my other book, I talk about liver wood. I don't just say liver. And when I talk about kidney, I say kidney water. So you got to think about the kidney. Don't think about the anatomy. You think about it as water. And you think about a liver, you think about it as wood. So in that sense, and you can understand things better. So if somebody got sick and you look at what liver does, what wood does, wood actually about erect and the flexibility, isn't it? So if someone lost the flexibility, you say that's liver wood indeficient. If somebody lost the erectness, and you say that's liver wood yang problem. So then you look at these, and then you can connect to kidney, isn't it? So you look at the herbs, you're also looking at, say, what herbs, like, I'll give you an example as acni. When you talk about acni, you talk about the heat, and they go into the water. So when you're using them, you don't say, acni treating what disease and joint problems, all these things. But you look at acni give you heat in the kidney. So then any kind of problem in the heat loss, you can use acni. It doesn't really matter about blood pressure. If in the blood pressure sense you say, that's so hot, you can't use that herbs, isn't it? Because the so-called blood pressure, we say liver wood indeficient, isn't it? Erect. They're too dry and too kind of firm. So you want them flexible. So what do you do with the flexibility? You got to warm the water to rise, to make the water rise, to make the liver wood flexibility. So that's a difference, isn't it? If you're in the 辨证论治, modern Chinese medicine, there's a system called 辩证论治. A lot of Western people telling me that, I even heard, in the Western medical education, Chinese medicine, maybe they not talk about, some of them not talk about 辩证论治, but you told about the 辩证论治. If you told about the body as anatomy, and the physiology, pathology. And then you look at a sickness as disease, isn't it? So when you look at a disease and then you say, is that yin disease? Is that yang disease? Is that a hot and cold and disease? Or is that a dry and wet? You are actually 辩证论治. You're in that system. So that system gives you rigid. It's not flexibility. So when you're looking at that kind of a sense of sickness, you paralyze. Say you got a headache, actually they say, this is a hot headache, a cold headache. You got all the herbs for that. And you done that one, you can't succeed. And then you do another. How many patients will give you that patience to let you try out all kind of things before you get there? And you might lucky again.
I think we usually get 2 chances.
Yeah, well, that's it.
I think most patients give us 2 chances.
That's it. So then if you're lucky, you get one. But then next one, you might lose. Because you don't have a clear directions, how you use it, why you use it, isn't it? So when you actually in 阴阳五行, doesn't matter what is it. Well, in my practice, a lot of Western people tend to come to me and say, there's new disease. There's some of diseases, even most medical doctors don't know what name yet. But you can treat it because I don't care about disease. I look at it as, you can't escape about, is that yin or yang? Or is that a water, or is that a flexibility, or is that a heat, Or is that the mucus, trapped in something? Or is that the soil not loosening enough, too sticky? You always work out a reason, and you always have a ability to find the method. And some people telling me, say, you must use Zhang Zhongjing's formula. I don't. I never do. I use any formula because I make up my formula. If the formula didn't really, some herbs disappear, do I just sitting there and say, sorry, I can't treat you because I don't have the herbs? You got to find a way. If somebody cold, you don't say, I haven't got a hot water. So then you paralyzed. You got to use heater. Or you can't have a heater, you have like a warm blanket. So there's always a way to work for it if you understand the principle. But if you're with the 辩证论治, or you say only the hot water can fix up the coldness, and then you don't have a hot water, you say, sorry, I can't treat you because the hot water loss. And that's what difference, the flexibility.
This episode is brought to you by Zheng, the clinic management software that honestly just makes running a practice easier. Let's dive into something that's never easy, but sometimes necessary: raising your fees. It can feel awkward, right? But here's a tip that can really help. Consider offering flexibility to your patients as you introduce the change. When patients face new fees, it's natural for them to feel uncertain or concerned. That's where flexibility can really make a difference. Offering options like a phased increase, suggesting a payment plan, or even taking a moment to talk things through can help to ease the transition. These thoughtful gestures show your patients that you're listening and care about them, which strengthens the trust you've worked so hard to build. If you're looking for more ideas on how to navigate these kinds of changes, head to frontdesk.zheng.app and check out the article, How to Tell Clients You're Raising Your Fees. One last thing, if you're ready to give Zheng a try, you can use the code CHIOLOGICAL for a 1-month grace period on your new Zheng account. So if you understand the principle, you can discover and create any method to address that principle.
Absolutely. Yeah. So then you become flexible. And that's what made people rigid with the 辩证论治 system. Yeah, that's what I'm arguing. And that's why people have no confidence and you have no reasoning system. In my book, I gave you example, one of this, the biggest, famous Chinese medicine doctor who just recently died, actually, Deng Tietao. And he kind of gave examples, say how wonderful that 辩证论治 is. And he gave example how he treated this fetus, dead, still fetus. And then he used one formula, didn't work, and he used another, and he did 4 times and then worked. And then he said, you see, you can always find a way. But that's just a trial and error. You can't do that in the clinic, isn't it? I mean, if people don't give you the chance. How many formula can you remember? And how many times people give you the time to look at it? But if you understand what is yin and yang or whatever, you can find needle points, isn't it? And you can actually strengthen you say there's not enough steam in there. I'll give you some heat. I can work on the, kidney yang meridian, work on the urine bladder. So you're flexible. And then on that, the needle points is so simple because this is, like I said, it's like a 八卦, isn't it? And the 卦, it's the yang line, yin line, they lined up. So you say, if it's a yang line, and I want more yang, what do? They say, you got to 补, isn't it? Nourish. How do you nourish? You go with the meridian flow. And then if you say, this is yin line, I don't like it, I want to change, what do? You needle in the points against the meridian line. So how simple that is. You just got to learn the proper thing. We didn't learn. We told about these points. Oh, the 三阴交 is because, 3 yin points are meet together and all that. And why? How? How do I use them? Only for this disease, for that disease. And if they didn't work enough, what do? You say, okay, this medicine is not perfect. So
yeah. Well, you mentioned 三阴交, spleen 6, for you people that don't speak Chinese. So this is a really useful point, super important point. I'm curious from your perspective with 阴阳五行, How would you think about applying that? Can you give us a clinical case of using sanyin that demonstrates the way that you think about using the changes, not just the how do I say the idea, but the actual changes that we're talking about here?
Well, I had somebody had overdue the birth. She's 10 days late delayed.
Okay.
Yeah.
Late delayed delivery.
Yeah, late delayed delivery. And she was kind of very dry, like you can feel that she just doesn't have the movement in the water. And so what I did, I actually used the sanyin. I feel her water is congested. So, and it worked. So I didn't really go with whatever they say sanyin do, because I feel that's her water is congested, because that also with the soil organ, isn't it? So the soil actually is not loosening, sticky.
So in this case, for her, you would tonify or sedate sanyin.
I
Sedate
sedate
sanyin.
because what I do is I feel that's blocked. The water is blocked. So I got to loosen them up. And what I'm strengthening is on the urine bladder.
Strengthen the urinary bladder to strengthen the water.
That's right, to make the water
yang water.
hot, warm.
This is the yang water,
That's
right?
right, exactly.
As opposed to yin water.
Exactly. So you make the yin kind of not sticky, and you make the yang kind of move, warming and strengthen. So you get a water flow. Yeah, that's how you're actually using them. Yeah, every point. And in my last 2 books, I haven't really talked enough about acupuncture. That's why I'm doing this new book. It's about a kind of acupuncture, and I'm tracing the points. And also very important, people talk about spleen number 6 or something. Every point there's meaning, and that meaning to do with the bagua. So you have to learn the words. When I actually teach you have to learn basic Chinese. You don't have to learn everything, but you got to learn what Changshan means. Changshan is like bearing the mountain, isn't it? So and then that's a gengua, isn't it? So you got to actually know the basics. So if you don't know the words, you don't know the meaning of the points, it's harder.
It is harder. Well, I've found, because I studied here in the United States, I learned, of course, by channel and number. But when I found myself in Taiwan and in Beijing, nobody uses the number. They call it by the name. So I had to learn names. Once I started to learn names, I realized there was all kinds of information by the name. So I'd like to ask you about a couple of points and get your thoughts on how to use these in clinic, because they show up for me a lot. So for example, 学分, right? Ren 9, 学分, water division. 水 分 水分
okay,
水分
yes.
对不起
Yeah,
我
that's
中文
right,
没有
that's
那么好
right, yeah,
right?
yeah.
But so that point, from the point of view of 阴阳五行, its name basically means water division. We know it has something to do with fluids. How do you think about using that one in clinic?
Well, in the clinic, you got to also look at it as the water, what kind of causing these problems, isn't it? So if I was using them, when you have, like modern things we say, make edema and all those things, you don't really work on that sense. And you're working on that, the definition of the water, isn't it? So definition of water is because the soil and the water, and sometimes they muddy. They muddy. So you making that point, make them clear, make them a kind of definition. So that's what I would use.
It sort of settles the water. It pulls the soil out of the water.
That's right. Yes.
And
so
clarifies
it makes clarifies them. Yeah, and to make clean the water. And I would also use them, quite often in the lung problems, in the cough. Cough is like mucus, and then it's kind of muddy. So it's not clear. So I can use them to clear the water, to make them flow, make the dirty and the clean separated.
So even for a lung issue, you could use 学分 to clarify the fluids of the lung.
Yes, exactly. So you're not really trapped with all the 辨證論治, they tell you what this do, what that do. You don't really care. Same as the herbs. You don't really restricted by what these herbs do. You actually using these herbs as what you're thinking. Give example with the 地龙. 地龙 says are good for kind of flexibility, good for joint problems and all that kind of things, and also for inflexible. But you look at a 地龙, I look at 地龙 as, what 地龙 does? They go into the mud, isn't it? So they process your soil. And I actually use for people who had a very bad Western medicine would diagnose them with cancer. And the tongue is very thick and very kind of grubby and tummy pain a lot. I use a lot of 地龙 for it, and it works so well because 地龙 would actually go there, process the soil, isn't it? So to make some soil loosening up and make
right.
it moving.
I mean, it's the bug that lives in the soil and loosens up soil.
Yes, exactly. So that's what you do. That's how, if you think everything in the yin-yang wuxing sense, you make everything. You can do it. You can actually imagine your own rather than following that, the 辩證論治. It's so different. And the other things like aloe vera, and a lot of people using them say, clear the heat and get rid of the rubbish. It does, but it's very, very cold for kidney, isn't it? Because you got to look at where aloe vera grows. So you look at aloe vera, like I look at aloe vera, I say, it's actually need heat. It hate the cold, isn't it? Need a lot of heat. And then also need water. They're growing well. So what happens? It's dry and it's cold, very cold. So if you have a kidney problem, you're using that, you hurt, you damage your kidney, you kill yourself. And then, but on the heat rash, because heat rash is hot and watery, so you put them on there, immediately tomorrow it disappears. So that's how you're using the plants, using herbs and using needles. And that's what I'm arguing. The reason a lot of people don't have a confidence or don't have actually very good efficacy in the clinic, because you don't understand principle. When you understand, you create your own method. And now I want people to do that. So I'm trying to promoting this medicine. I mean, I call them yi. I don't really like to call them medicine because to separate from Western point, that thinking as medicine, healing. Yeah.
You are really going back to the basic principles of the medicine. The transformations of yin-yang, the way that we look at those as has been mapped out through the I Ching. And then there's 5 steps that'll take us through a transformation. That would be the wuxing. And with that basic framework, if we understand that framework, if we understand the principles embodied in that, it really doesn't matter what kind of problem people come in with, and it doesn't matter if we've seen that problem or know how to treat that problem, because if we're attentive to the process, the method will reveal itself.
That's right. That's how it is. That's how, in the old ancient time, it's not really long ago. It's only about 100 years ago. I mean, even my time, I met people doing that. And just come to, my generation, we stuck. Or maybe my mother's generation.
So you had some teachers who pointed you in this direction.
Well, what happened is they never talked to me about yin-yang wuxing, as principle. But kind of indirectly, like I asked a teacher, he was so skillful treating anything like magic. And I kind of, beginning was, I follow him and I recording all his formulas and everything. But then I asked him, everything I asked him, I think in my book I mentioned this. There was a rash. Somebody had a very severe rash. And then he used this formula. And I used it, worked so well. And I asked him, I said, why? And then he said, because I called them eczema, not eczema in the Chinese, we call hives. And hives means, it's kind of a word, doesn't mean anything, really, just to describe the rash itself. But he said it's called zheng, which means wind rash.
Wind rash, right.
Yeah, and so if you call the wind rash, and he said heat create wind. And he said you get rid of the heat and the rash goes. So
Right,
he
the wind will
used,
settle on its own.
yes, exactly. And then I also had another kind of old doctor, and I had actually very bad cough, and I treated everything and used a lot of herbs. I was still coughing. I blind because I talk too much every day, seeing people. And I asked him, I said, how do I do this? Why can't I actually get over this? And he said, you got to strengthen the soil to nurture the metal. So I did. And it worked. Actually, that's my own formula. And it did work. I was shocked. I said, how come this theory we're not told properly? So from there, I just always trace on this trend. I in my other book, I got this 二仙汤, which is an old formula. And I was told by a doctor, and they said, this is very good for kind of menopause. He said that. But I actually translate that as, what menopause is. So I look at the symptoms, you get a hot flashes, and you got a really kind of hot and cold, and you get an emotional problem, you can't sleep. So I explain that as, your kidney heat loss is because your trees are too dry and they turn to fire. And then that disturb the heart, the spirit. So what I do is I warm the kidney and cooling the liver, and then ground the fire down. So I formulate this, and when I explain that way, you can treat anything which you feel that's the heat and the wood problem and the spirit problem they link. So, so gradually that just pushed me on that track. And now I go back to the classics and I learn myself. Yeah. So nobody really direct me the way properly. I mean, directly say, read this, like what I'm telling you, you must learn the principle, you must learn the changes. Yeah.
I have found in the time that I've studied and practiced Chinese medicine that there are people who had methods to teach, and those methods could be very helpful for the specific things that those methods were useful for. But then there were other people that at the time it didn't even seem that helpful because they kind of pointed me in a direction to make an inquiry of my own where I could start to put together some different principles. So that leads me to this next question. You were talking about the liver earlier on, and you were talking about when you talk about liver, you have to say wood liver. It's not enough just to say liver, wood liver. Liver wood. And
Yes.
then there's also the yang aspect and the yin aspect of the liver.
That's absolutely, yes.
It seems to me, as we've been taught the Wuxing, at least here in the West, at least in my limited education, it has really focused on the yin organs. So like when we talk about wood, people go, oh, wood, liver. Well, I mean, there's also the gallbladder, but people rarely talk about it, right? If we talk about fire, people go, oh, fire, that's the heart. Well, it's also the small intestine. So there's this yin and yang aspect, not just of the organs, but of the elements themselves.
That's right. And that's what when you're doing acupuncture, you got to work on the yin meridian and yang meridian. And why they have yin meridian and yang meridian, isn't it? Because there's the yin side and there's yang side. Yeah. So very important in that. I mean, we're not told. I mean, if a lot of people say, we learn everything, but did you learn that? Did you learn the yin side and yang side? And did you learn actually, when you're in the clinic, if you meet any problem, do you get panic if you didn't know how to do it? So if you do, that means that you haven't learned properly, isn't it? So with this way, even if something I never heard or I haven't got a clue, but then what I'm thinking is at least I have this clue. Is that yin or is that yang? Or is that warm, is that cold? So I got this basic idea. And now I say, if my formula is not working, where do I go? If it's not hot enough, like I'm treating a problem, actually I've been treating myself. I had a very serious poison from formaldehyde and benzene, in China. I was in China. In the house, new house, the fittings, it's all very poisonous. They put
Chemical sensitivity.
Yes, I mean, it's not sensitivity, it's serious poisonous. And now I actually got a rash, like blister all over the body, and red, and then fever. And then really, I almost dead, really. I mean, it's amazing that our life still today. And then why I use herb, if people look at that, you're thinking, oh, you got a heat and you got I couldn't eat and then fever. So you got to use a lot of cold herbs, isn't it? But then really, before you get a fever, you get this cold for a few days, really cold, and you're shaking the kidney. So you say, what that is? What causes this fever? It's the cold, isn't it? Your kidney losing the heat. And then you're losing the heat and you got to actually, and then the tree dries and then you get a fever. You get a burn, fire. That's when you get a fever. So I actually looking at this and I say, I never really got Western medical diagnosis because I don't want to see them. And I just use, so I use the foods and I found the foods wasn't enough. So I start using 草wu.
草
And
屋
then I, 草 wu,
you were serious
and you
about
add
getting some heat in
onto-
there.
Oh, yes, very much. And then I use 60 grams each day. 60 grams 草wu each day. And then you add actually all the like 肉桂啊 and you 洋火叶啊 八吉啊 仙茅啊 当归啊 so you use all these hot herbs and try to support it. But then of course at the same time what you do is because you got a lot of rash, that means you got liver wound young damage, got rotten inside. So you got to actually use like things like 土鳖虫, the 土鳖虫, the
bug
bugs.
to really strongly
And then
move the blood.
Yeah, and you got to use 五香啊 没药啊 all these things which are good for cleaning the blood, which I call them like a trees rotten. What do? You got to chop them out. You can't. And I use 斑毛. 斑毛 is very important.
斑毛 I'm not familiar with.
斑毛, I don't know the English name clearly in my head. I have to
I
read
don't know
it.
the English names of these things either. I only know the pinyin or the Chinese.
I know it's called the blister beetle. Yeah, I mean common name is blister beetle.
Okay.
Yeah, blister beetle.
Another one of those bugs that strongly moves things.
Yes, very, very, very poisonous, but very, very effective. Beautiful. And what that does is, if you have kind of swollen, and what they do is they separate, they get the water out in that kind of a swollen, and then they transform the swollenness become pus and the water away. So you get a big blister, and when the water out, the pus come out, and you get over the problem. Very,
And
very
you get the toxins
beautiful.
out of the system that way.
Yeah,
So-
so I call them liverwood young herbs. Yeah, they get rid
Now-
of that.
This is a fabulous example, and thank you for sharing it with us, your own experience. You have all these symptoms. It looks super hot, but the origin came from cold. And I think this gets tricky for us in clinic because people come in. We may not know that they had cold originally. I mean, this was you in your own experience. You remember being cold before this came on. But in clinic, it can be trickier because people come in and maybe all they've got are the heat symptoms that you're seeing. How do you work things out for yourself so that you can get a sense of what really began the problem for your patient?
You got to ask a history. I do actually spend a lot of time with the patient. You got to get them trust. A lot of times people give me your fake information. They come in, they say, oh, I got this. And after long talking, and they actually expose some of the things which you get, clear. So you do need to understand, say, before you, how do you get it and what's happening. And sometimes people don't even understand themselves. But then you got to look at the symptoms. The symptoms, and the tongue tells you things, and the pulse tell you things, and the skin color tell you things. I mean, there's a lot of information you can collect. But, like in 辨證論 they say, oh, you got a pulse, you got a tongue, you don't need everything. Because once you determine what problem is, you don't have to. But if you haven't, and you look at every kind of, every aspect of symptoms or even family problems or even where they work. And like I had actually, somebody had this, couldn't sleep. And she said that they moved in this new house and then turning, just can't sleep. I actually went their house and next to them, about a few hundred meters away, and there was a big television power there. So you got to look at all kind of reasons. If you didn't go, you probably don't know. I mean, I had another case which somebody got a bit rash. It just feel like you poison, and I couldn't know what. That was the beginning. I kind of didn't realize how bad this glue is. And then later on, after I had a problem, and I realized she had a new kitchen put in, but I didn't really realize that. So, you do learn along the side, but even if you don't know what the original case is, you look at the symptom. Say, for example, if I didn't know somebody had a cold before, but then you also feel very cold, you're going to ask people. That's always things I ask. You like to be hot or you like to be cold? I mean, in my case, before fever or even during after no fever time, you're cold. You're very cold. You just want to be warmer. So you ask these kind of questions. Yeah, I always ask these few questions about soil. You got to ask a few questions about soil. You got to ask a few questions about wood, and a few questions about water. You around this, yeah, and then you detect. So
Having a thriving, profitable practice is one of the most healing things you can do as a healthcare practitioner, because a robust business is the ultimate expression of vital qi, and that's the heart of our medicine. I'm Julie Bairdontlock, and I help practitioners grow nourishing, profitable, authentic businesses that embody the generative cycle of Chinese medicine. This isn't about all yang all the time. It's about expanding your own internal capacity, growing collaborative relationships with your patients for ethical patient retention, and marketing as an extension of this medicine, not a necessary evil. You already know that everything is connected in your patients' lives and bodies. The same is true for your business. When we align your systems, your schedule, your pricing, and your offerings with you, we create flow, which means more spaciousness, more impact, and more joy. When you are in the flow, fully resourced in terms of chi, time, and money, your business becomes a source of healing, not just for your patients, but for you. Let's grow something rooted, radiant, and real. Visit lifeflowconsulting.com to learn more.
So as you talk with your patients, you make sure to touch on every one of the 5 phases to see which one seems to have an issue. And then you differentiate from there. Is this an yin problem or a yang problem?
that's right. And then you're also asking what relationship, because sometimes, like say, you got a heat rash, it's the heat, isn't it? And you got to ask a few water and other problems, because the patient actually behind them, do they have a cold, water? Is that really just a strong body and had too much rubbish and got rash? And if that case, I'll just clean, no worries. But if somebody actually say, generally very weak body and very weak and tired and cold or whatever, and you say this is not a simply, just the heat. It's the heat building from rotten, from something, fermenting heat. So then what you do is you got to be careful, because that kind of thing, you can't just clean, because you clean, you cool kidney, you make more, stagnation, and
Right,
you
they
make
get
more
weaker.
fermenting. Yes.
So in that case, you'd have, it's like dealing with damp heat in a sense. You have to do a little bit of nourishing, so they've got something to work with. At the same time, you've got to clean out the joie. You got to clean out what's dirty.
In that kind of case, you actually make steps, a few separate steps. What comes very urgent, you got to really do quickly, isn't it? If somebody got a heat rash, really itchy, they can't even eat, they're vomiting, I got to clean them out first. Just suppress them, and then straight away, when that actually the symptoms are down, and I got to warm the kidney, I got to really, supporting whatever the behind the problems. Then sometimes I make a few different steps. I had a case, this is probably a good example. Somebody had 20 years of urine infection all the time. And then she been on antibiotic for 20 years, on and off, on and off. And when she came here, she couldn't even, antibiotic doesn't even work anymore. So she suffered. And so what I look at her is she got she in pain, and then couldn't really pee. That's a very difficult case. So I do a big cleaning up first, clean the water first. And then what I did was warming the kidney. And then when the problem is not really too bad, I warm. But when you warm, sometimes you get the rubbish out as well. So then you clean. So sometimes you use two kind of herbs. In the morning, probably actually warming, and nighttime I clean because otherwise you can't sleep. So you just looking at the symptom and you decide. You make a few different steps. Yeah. And I had another case. A lady had complicated cases. She got a liver, kidney problem, and everywhere. But when she came here, her heart was like got a fluid covered, so she couldn't breathe, and she heart very weak, and it's very difficult. But then she's allergic to all kind of herbs, like she can't take this, she can't take that. So what do? I loosen the soil first. Nobody would be, sensitive to cinnamon and sensitive to what they call licorice and all these things. So I actually work on that as mild things first to get a little bit loose in the soil. And then I actually warm a little bit the kidney and I loosen a bit the soil. So then I actually clean up a little bit the liver. You just got to do a few different steps and make strategies.
As we've been having this conversation today, I've been hearing you use the term loosen the soil more than a few times, which makes me think, okay, earth element seems to be the root of a lot of issues that come into your clinic.
Very much. I mean, everybody really. It's not just in my clinic. Because with the soil in the 五行 is the middle, isn't it? Everything got to go through the soil. So if the soil congested, anybody have a problem. Every part have a problem. Also can affect the soil. So the yin of the soil is the stickiness, and the yang of the soil is the looseness. So if soil is not loosened and the kidney water can't rise, and the hot fire, the heat can't descend. So if the soil is not loosening, and then the lung got no moisture, and then the trees can't reach to the water. So you got to really loosening the soil is one of the big problem, because we call each nature of this 五行 have the basic nature, like a water. Water is basically cold, isn't it? So they always need to be young, loosen. Need to be young. The soil is sticky. That's the basic. It's the yin. So they always need to be warm to loosening. So that's you got to have this. Yeah, you got to understand they have a basic nature, but they have yin side and yang side. It's like you got to have the basic, but you also need the other side to work together. Like a man and woman to make baby, and you're basically man, but you need woman, and then to create the baby, isn't it?
Or even something as simple in this life as having an inhale and an exhale. Without both, you don't have anything.
Yes,
so
absolutely.
When you talk about the Wuxing, the 5 phases, you're not thinking about it in the way that is often shown in the books, where it's a circle and there's 5 different points. You could almost make a star out of it. You are thinking about the earth as in the middle. There's an up, there's a down, there's a right, there's a left, and in the middle is the soil, is the earth.
Yeah, that 五行 circle you say is how they move, how they change. But in the what you call 八卦, if you see the 八卦, the 五行 always in the middle. Also in this new book, I explaining what 五行 is, where they come from. It's not just about the wood, water. You know what 五行 is? 五行 came from 天干, if you heard of 天干.
天干, tell us about 天干.
Yeah, you put a stick there, and then where the sun actually landing, isn't it? The sun come up and from the east, and then the shadow go to the west. And when the sun actually down, and then the shadow is going to the east, isn't it? So this is the west and the east. And then the sun also in winter, so they go south and the west also a little bit, isn't it? They go longer stay and a shorter stay. So then you get actually the shadow longer and shorter. So what that means is that's 4 directions. And this 4 direction means the hot, the cold, and the spring, summer, and the autumn, and the winter. So this is the 4th season. And the middle, that's where you are, where the stick is. That's where we benefit from the sun. So that's 五行. So 五行 The middle is the soil.
In the middle is the soil. And it is what is steady and things move around it and through it.
That's right. That's right. So we talk about the soil receiving the sun, isn't it? So receiving the heat. And when the sun coming, the soil get warmer. And when the sun actually get hottest time, and then we get the most warmer. And then when the sun going down, we get cooler. And when the sun is really right down there, we get really cold. What that means, things grow. And or we get up or we lie down. So this is 五行.
It sounds like you're also talking about tracking the yang and the transformational influence of yang on the various elements, the various phases.
Yeah, so really the 天干, what I say is 天干 is about position. It's the sun and the moon that are position, that are relative the sun and relative to the moon, to the what you call earth. So that's what the position is. So the 八卦 is about position and time, isn't it? Because this position follow the time. So the time is 地支. And this is the 天干 and the 地支 together, that work together. And that's what the yin and yang is about. And that's what the 五行 came about. And that's what the 八卦 came from. And then what 河图洛书, I actually explained from 天干地支, and then how that form this 洛书. And then the 洛书.
洛书, what does 洛书 mean?
洛书, you know the 河图 and the 洛书, the first very basic. In my book, I explained that the first, you could say, is the diagram or illustration of 阴阳五行 theory, the 河图 and 洛书. And that's where 八卦 come from.
Okay. So I'm getting a sense of this, and it's super helpful. I'm curious to see how I start thinking in clinic with just having these ideas in my head now. Where does the Liujing fit into this? Liujing, right? The 6 confirmations or 6 levels. There's no great way to translate Liujing. I'm going to call it the 6 Jing. How does that fit into this?
It's a very good question, but it's a long question. I don't think we can explain them here. But you know, like 八卦, 八卦 is heaven and earth, and the rest is the 3 Jing, really. It's 少阳, you know, 太阳, 阳明, and 少阴, 太阴, 厥阴. That's where the 六阴 come from. That's come from the 河图洛书, or come from 八卦. So if you understand that, actually you don't really talk about, I mean, we talk about 六经 as 六经辩证, 辩证, yeah, the modern Chinese one, 六经辩证, 说是 which 经 the problem.
Where's the problem, right? Zhang Zhongjing, you know, talked about this, of course. Zhang Hanlun.
Zhang Zhongjing, actually, Zhang Zhongjing didn't talk the way as the 辩证论知 talk about. I mean, they misinterpreted that. Actually, they made a false kind of representation for him. But really what Zhang Zhongjing tells is about 八卦, how the changes go from which jing to which jing. You know, like how this long meridian going to the large intestine, and then, you know, how this is transformed. That's what the Liu Jing is about. So it's also about how the yin meridian going to the yang. And then the, you know, as I said, the yin side of the organ and yang side of organ after all.
How the yin goes to the yang. That's a very evocative statement, and we might need a whole other conversation just to get into that. But when I think about the 6 Jing, let's just start with the Taiyang for a moment, okay? Because Taiyang is really interesting. We generally think of Taiyang as being cold. You know, when we think about like the climate of the Taiyang, we usually think of it being cold, right? It's associated with the urinary bladder.
No, that's the yang side of urine bladder.
The yang,
yang side of a kidney water. Yang side of water. How can that be the yin, the cold? I mean, you associate that as with the yang dominant.
Okay, well, just stick with me for just a second. I want to see if I can understand this, because there's so much that I don't understand. So I think about the Taiyang, right? And on one side, you're talking about the yang side of the kidney water, which is the urinary bladder. On the other side of the Taiyang, we have the small intestine, which to me is a most curious organ because in the Chinese medicine that I learned about, they don't say much about what the small intestine is or does. It's almost like it's a forgotten organ.
You don't think about that as what I call them anatomy sense. You got to forget about that. You think about that as a shaoyang, isn't it? You think about it as this is really, you have to go through the bagua to know the lines of the yin and the yang, and then you would, it's a little, we really need another probably talk after, especially after my next book come out and you understand a lot more because you need a lot more explanation how the changes are. As what I'm saying, the yin and the yang, the traditional yi is about a change. Not everybody in traditional Chinese medicine, they learn traditional yi, they actually know everything. So then they call the ru yi and then yi gong. A lot of them, they probably just need some skills, they know basic and know skills. But the people who are really good with it, they got to know about the change, about the Yi Jing. Yeah, once you know the Yi Jing, you know the change, and you understand what the Shaoyang, what Taiyang, what Yang Ming, these things mean, and the yin side and yang side of each organ.
Okay. So this is in the new book that you're working on, or is this
I'm working on, yeah. No, that's the new book. Yeah, because in the last couple of books, I mostly concentrate on herbs. So this one is about meridian. If you explain meridians, you explain points, you have to explain how this changes in this, you have to get from there because this is very long. So I spent the last 6 months just did the theory part, tell people what is the Tiangan, Dijit, how the Wuxing came from, how the yin and yang, the concept came from, and how they form this theory, and how that become a bagua, and how bagua actually lead to the body. So you got to understand that before you can actually explain the meridians, because that's what form the meridian and the body. And this.
The I Ching is really the operating manual for an E doctor.
Yes. And I Ching actually, that's where the Huangdi Neijing, everything is based on that. That's Huangdi Neijing is the extension of I Ching in healing.
Well, it sounds like I have some work to do in some study to go back and look at this.
Because there's no book I can find. That's why it's very difficult. I have to just trace from the beginning and work out all myself. In the old text, they kind of use it, but they don't really explain enough to say how that connected. And there were a couple of Chinese doctors in China, modern Chinese doctor, write a couple of books about the I Ching and Chinese medicine. I read it. It was terrible because they just say, you see, this I Ching got these words, and this Chinese medicine we use this word. That's why we connected. That's terrible, isn't it?
Oh, that's
a
pretty thin connection. But I want to come back to the small intestine for just a moment here because you're talking about we hear things or we're taught things and we're supposed to try to make some meaning of it. So I can remember being told about the small intestine and like what it does, but I never really understood like the proper physiology of the small intestine from a Chinese. Yeah, it's like what does the small intestine do in Chinese medicine? I've got a sense of what it does in Western medicine. But, when we learn about the different organs,
we must actually get away from that modern Western medicine thinking,
Exactly. That's my point exactly. And so if I'm going to be thinking about the small intestine, if I'm going to be thinking about the yang side of Shaoyin, the yang side of the heart, how do I start to think about that? I can say these words and I can ask the question in clinic if there's an issue with the small intestine, or maybe another way to say it is if you're treating the small intestine, what is it that you're thinking about in terms of changes that you're trying to bring to a system?
It's first, I would say it's a yang side of the heart, isn't it? What does heart does is the heart is a fire, and the fire actually naturally rise, isn't it? So then the inside of the heart is grounding, and the yang side of the heart is floating. So that's what the small intestine does. It's a kind of floating heat. That's what it generally is. They're floating. So when you work on the small intestine, you got to think about how actually, say quite often, this is a problem with the heart because the heart is yang organ. Heart fire is yang, isn't it? So then they often lack of yin. So you got to grounding them. But if somebody actually doesn't have enough of yang heat, you work on the small intestine points.
To bring that yang heat up through the yin.
All you does is because the small intestine makes, it's external of the heart, isn't it? That's what we call the yang and the inside. So what they do is the spirit that receiving from heaven and earth, that's where small intestine meridian does. So that's when you're working on that, you're thinking about how I bring the heat into the heart fire.
I so appreciate our conversation today. I've got all kinds of new ways of taking some stuff that I already know, but just looking at it from a slightly different point of view. So appreciate it.
Yeah, that's what I like to take this opportunity to answer a lot of people saying, in the West, we learn a lot of yin and yang and wu xing, all this. And I want to tell people, say, if you know the change, you have learned. If you don't know the change, you haven't learned. You learn the terms, you haven't learned about yin and yang and wu xing. Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you so much. Any idea on when this new book of yours might be out? It's always bad to ask an author when their book is coming out because we know books always take much longer than we thought. But do you have a timeline on this?
I thought it was September this year, but no. I hope end of this year I can bring them out, really, because I've done the theory part now. And now I need to, but actually to line the points, each points with all the bagua is another task because there's nobody ever done that. So you got to make sense. Not I just, I can actually have the basic idea, but I have to make sense. And the name of the points and the why actually, that's gua, like which one is to do. Each gua got a 6 yao, 6 lines. And each line, which line is which point. And now I got to actually using this zheng da cheng, there's a book, zheng da cheng. You prove from them to say they're using it and not telling you why. So that's, I'm trying to make sense of that. It takes time, yeah.
I look forward to this, and I suspect all the listeners out here are looking forward to this as well.
Thank you.
Well, here we are at the end of this episode. If you've listened up to this point, you're either a rabid fan of Qiological or the forward button on your podcast player stopped working. If you are indeed a fan of the podcast, you can help us to bring new episodes to our community of practitioners by supporting us with a membership or a one-time contribution. Details, of course, are on the website. That's it for today, friends. Join us again next Tuesday for another thoughtful episode of Qiological.